first.
The Nigerian Export Promotion Council, NEPC, says that Nigeria's 2024 non-oil exports hit $5.45 billion. The NEPC also declared that a breakdown of the numbers reveal that the country is currently represented in 126 nations across the world. Joining the conversation is Samuel Oyekomi, a researcher at Norimberga. Mr. Oyekomi, good morning and thank you for joining us on the conversation.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Very interested in your reactions to this announcement by the NEPC.
Yeah, well, I don't think I'm surprised, considering that there's been a lot happening around Nigeria's international trade. So, of course, there is still the caveat of huge oil exports and oil trade transactions, but then also in the non-oil side of things, we've also seen improvements, either due to improved international relations with other trading partners, and then also the African Free Continental Trade Agreement also that has helped Nigerians to improve export and import transactions with neighboring African nations. So yeah, I think it is fair to say that we've seen improved trade activities. I'm merely just looking at even NBS data over the last few years, the last 2 years up until Q3 last year. We've seen improved numbers, especially in terms of our export value, which has made our trade balance to be in the positive region in recent times. So yeah, and it's quite a good one. But of course, what we want to see a more diluted international trade component, whereby you have a lot more exports than imports. And then in terms of exports, it's a lot more than just crude oil. We would love to see a lot of more refined and then agricultural produce in that.
So, Mr. Oyekomi, if we look at the a breakdown of the information, right, the top 5 destinations for export, Spain comes in at number 1, then you've got the US, France, Netherlands, and then Italy. It's sort of like a good variety when you compare on the other end, the top 5 countries we import from. So the only country that cuts across both lists is actually the United States of America. But what's interesting is that on that top 5, we don't have African countries showing up there. Speak to us about why it's important we see more African countries show up on our trade balance sheets, whether it's by imports or exports.
Okay, so for African nations, I think that it's a bit more complicated, considering that we're talking about volume and value. And then when you look at what we export in most cases, aside from crude oil, those are agricultural produce. And then in terms of agriculture, I don't think we expect neighboring African nations to import that from us as much. And then in terms of crude, how many of them have refining capacity to be able to import crude oil from us in large quantities? So we won't have that right now. But most of the things we have, when you look at those numbers, and then you trace where they are coming from, and then where when they come into Nigeria, and where we also export them to, you see that they're mostly we export commodities, things like used vessels, used helicopters, and things like electricity, which will give the likes of Benin and Ghana around us. So you don't find African nations importing a lot more things of value in terms of volume and value now for us. It will be interesting to see that happen in coming years, but that is also going to be depending on what are the value that we offer to the market. At this point, the major that we offer is crude oil. What do they need? Right now, they don't have the refining capacity to buy crude from us. Even our refinery here, happens to also be selling refined oil, petrol to these neighboring African countries. That could also fit into the components going forward. But is that enough to bring it to top 5? It's going to be a huge one.
I hear you when you talk about how African countries, beyond oil, really, what else would they probably be importing from us? And it's worth saying that our exports to African countries far outweigh our imports from African countries. But I do want to come to that matter of oil versus non-oil. The one product that is non-oil that topped the list of our exports is cocoa beans, right? There are big questions on whether the agricultural direction for the year 2025 and under the Tinubu administration are ambitious enough to help us tip the scales or tip the balance of our oil versus non-oil exports.
Yeah, that's interesting. So starting from the cocoa side of things, what we saw last year was a significant jump in the cost of the price of cocoa in the international market. And that's as a result of major exporters of cocoa in the market, the likes of Ivory Coast and then Ghana. There were issues around supply, and that really drove significant hike in the price of cocoa. And that also reflected in our Nigerian numbers, because the revenue we made from cocoa pretty much jumped over 60%, even as of Q3 2024 compared to the previous year. I know that one of the things that has been that Nigeria has faced in recent years is food inflation and food insecurity. I know that the current administration has tried to manage food prices, which has led to a number of policies relating to agriculture, food importation, and then production and some form of intervention to ensure that farmers are able to improve that. And I would say that they are doing their piece, but of course it's never enough, considering the fact that we're still dealing with a record high inflation of over 34.8 food inflation, despite the fact that we saw a slowdown in December. Is still at near record high. So there's a huge issue there. And you would find it interesting that when you even look at these numbers, as much as say that we are Africa, we're the kind of Africa, we're a food producing nation and all that, you would find agricultural imports to be higher than agricultural exports for a country like Nigeria, over 200 or 220 million people, as we say. You just find it very alarming. So there's really a lot to be done. Is the government doing? Maybe, yes, but is it enough? Definitely not. We need to find a way to really scale up in production. And I think I've mentioned quite a number of times the importance of private sector in the food value chain, and then mechanized farming in ensuring that we improve and really scale up food production. I think if we're able to do that, we'll find agriculture contributing about 21% right now to GDP. We'll find improvement in terms of food supply, and then we'll be able to export even in better quantity abroad.
All right. So very quickly, Mr. Oyekomi, apart from these products, what else should we be paying attention to in terms of products that are more valuable and can improve our export numbers?
So for now, right, because like I said, what we currently offer to the market is either crude or crude. I'll use that word, because crude in terms of crude oil, and the other crude is in terms of agricultural products, which are unrefined. I think if we want to start trading, especially when you mentioned the African counterparts, we need to be able to improve our industrial sector to be able to convert some of these raw items into value that we can export to African nations, at least for a start. Considering that we don't think the likes of countries in Europe and Asia and will probably import those from us, since they have that in large quantity. But then, at least for the African nations, we should be able to do that. We also need to be able to export services. We have been we've been growing significantly in terms of the tech space, telecom space, and all that. I think we can also export some of those services, expertise, to especially African nations. I think that would also fetch us huge export earnings.
Right. Mr. Oyekomi, thank you very much for your time and expertise on this conversation. Samuel Oyekomi is a researcher at Norimberga who joined us this morning to speak about Nigeria's non-oil export numbers for 2024, which hit $5.45 billion, according to the Nigerian Export Promotion Council.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.